for those who were able to join us yesterday for the hike and cocktail hour. So really appreciate you all sharing some really cool projects that are going on within your community and giving us a warm welcome here in the northern part of the state. And for those who made the drive, really appreciate you all taking the time to come up here and assemble with this group of like-minded and similar communities throughout Montana that are able to implement this very special tool called the resort tax. I think to start with, we're going to do just a quick round of introductions. I missed that from the agenda, and then we'll jump in with coffee and conversations with Big Mountain Resort Area District. Thanks you all for joining us for this conversation. So with that, I will kick it over to the other side of the table with one of our host communities of Whitefish to just kick off our intros.
Thanks, Danny. My name's Dana. I am the city manager for the city of Whitefish. Also your board treasurer and secretary for the association.
I'm Katie Thompson. I'm the finance director for West Yellowstone.
I'm Nicole Watson. I am accounts payable clerk at City of Whitefish, resort tax collector. We do it.
I'm Lady Despederick and I'm the finance director at City Whitefish.
I'm Doug Reed. I'm the chair of the Resort Tax Monitoring Committee in Whitefish.
My name's Shane Group. I'm the fire chief for Hampton Basin Fire District West, and I'm currently serving as the business manager for Hampton Basin Resort Tax District.
Dave Westwood, Mayor Red Lodge.
And
also on the
and IT director.
Right, yes.
let's wait till it's working before we advertise that.
Goodness for Dave. I'm Diana Tang. I'm with Big Mountain Resort Tax Secretary.
Dan Walker, town manager in West Yellowstone and vice president of the RTA.
Finance director of Columbia Falls.
Ron Benton, chair of the Big Mountain Resort Area District Board.
Jay Johnston, I'm the treasurer with Big Mountain.
Jenny Christensen, deputy director with Big Sky Resort Area District.
Kristen Drain, finance and compliance director for Big Sky Resort Area District.
Tammy Essenson, communications and community engagement director for Big Sky.
And Mr. Westwood, what do we have for folks online? Let's do a check on folks.
Right now I have Gail and Jackie. Let's make sure they can hear us and vice versa.
The audio
Yeah.
is fantastic.
Great. Gail, do we have you? All right. So with that, thanks everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. One of the exciting things about resort tax is there's always communities that are looking at additional tools and have qualified, and some who have never applied for designation of a resort area district or a resort area rather. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our friends up here with the Big Mountain Resort Area District just to give us some lessons on what you all learned.
Want to do it from here or up there?
You can wherever you're comfortable.
Yeah.
Easier to see all from up here.
Yeah.
So I can share.
Yeah. I apologize for being the kickoff to this. We had Danny talking and Tammy, and it was exciting, and now you got me. So I'm Ron Benton, chair of the Big Mountain Resort Area District Board. I'm looking around the room and seeing friends, which is really appreciated. Also, Diana Tagg from our board, our secretary, Jay Johnson, the treasurer, asked the hard questions to them. But I truly mean that. We have some takeaways, but we wouldn't be here at the stage that we're at if it weren't for probably half the people in this room. And thankfully, we're getting phone calls from others that are saying, how did you get to where you are? And I understand some of the stuff we learned, you shared the chain with others and can help move things along. And that's grateful. So we have one slide up there. Oh, perfect. So this is the slide that I shared a year ago. I have updated it because fundamentally nothing has changed. We're on track. It's May, so as of 2 years ago, we were approved by our voters to be a board. So began, we really got rolling in January of a year and a half ago with having our voters approve a tax. So we approved the district, we approved our board members, then we approved the tax. We implemented the tax starting June 1 of last year. And now, it's almost May 31st, or almost have a year of collections. And we'll speak to that, and I'll probably have Jay talk a little bit about that too. And it's, you have a transition, you're kind of the bad guys early on because you're imposing a tax. And this is Montana, that is awkward, hard to do. And once you've got that rolling and settled, then suddenly you become kind of popular because you may actually be granting funds. And people want to know and seek you out a little bit more. But I go back to some of our lessons learned. So that started June 1. The compelling reason, I think it's the next slide, if you give just that one, the compelling reason that we exist was to be able to fund our fire department. About 5 years ago, they knew that they were on a path to lose our fire insurance rating for our property owners because they didn't have enough good members of the staff to maintain the level required by the accrediting organization. So that led to the formation of this group. And the cool thing is, if I point at the calendar, is that a year ago in March, we submitted a resolution along with our district to the insurance agency, ISO, for those of you who deal with it, saying that we're going to be in a position when they need incremental funds to grow to meet the requirements. We will be there with funds. That date is actually July 1. So 5 years ago, we said that our committee said we're going to have this need. We will have a full year of revenues. We just penciled off our interlocal agreement with the fire department yesterday. Their first need for revenues are on July 1. That's the start of our fiscal year 2. That's the first time we're going to be able to appropriate, and we're going to be there. So to me, that I describe it as a miracle. 5 years ago, you set out to do something when they have the need. A lot of this is slipped. We actually thought the need might be a year ago. We were delayed in launching some things like that, but here we are. So it's, I don't know if you would call it a plan or good fortune, but we start writing checks on July 1, and hopefully we have helped preserve the fire insurance rating for our district. That's huge, because as some of you know, we have properties near us that cannot get fire insurance. Go in Iron Horse and elsewhere, and others, the fire insurance is just raised dramatically when they are part of a fire district or fire service that can't meet their requirements for some reason or another. A huge deal for us. And now we're at the point where we are designing the granting process for nonprofits. You're gonna look at our treasurer and make sure you do this properly. We think when we introduce our budget proposal tomorrow, we'll probably have about $500,000 to begin to grant that. Oh, by the way, for those of you who don't know us, Big Mountain Resort Area District, we are adjacent to our good friends, the city of Whitefish and their resort community, but we're geographically different. We comprise Whitefish Mountain Resort and the small number of businesses, about the 400 units, 12 units around there. So we're different, but we're good friends with Whitefish and appreciate their help, and certainly everybody in the Big Sky team has been just ginormously helpful. So that's physically where we are. Couple other things for just getting going. Having a compelling need, we had one, because I've learned to meet new members, and as we've had calls from Lakeside and Big Fork and elsewhere in the state, you have to have some compelling need to be able to go back to your voters for. This is not something that you can just launch into and expect that things will happen. That really helped us. And actually, from our first election to our second election for the tax, the number of voters approving idea actually increased. So that was a nice thing. Huge thing for us, and we have 3 members of our board here. You've got to bring on a working board. Look at Shane, who's working real hard right now in his district. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do when you steal everything that you can from West Yellowstone and Big Sky and Columbia Falls and Whitefish. And which we have done just with great enthusiasm. Sometimes giving you proper citation and often not, but a uniquely good idea. So, you know, we're grateful that a lot of work to be done by the board secretary, a huge amount of work by the treasurer. Both of whom are trying to keep us all out of jail and out of bad headlines. And we've been successful with that. I also want to compliment the partnering that our board members have done. We're an interesting community because we have, I'm gonna guess, I'm gonna look at about Ann Arbor J. We have something like 180 registered voters in our district. We can house like 3,000 people overnight. Right, in the mountain on a big day, can have 9,000 skiers. So summertime is actually the biggest residential time for us, and so we can have 3,000 people up there. Hence also the need for a good fire department and immediate response. And so there's and there's a large transient service area that we need to do. But our board members have been essential in trying to figure out all these processes and getting them into place. So this is, we'll complete our funding now at the end of year 2. At the end of this calendar year, we would have done a full cycle of everything. So we've done the full cycle of granting, full cycle of tax receipts. I really need to compliment, and Susan Nicosia is our accountant, and most of you know Susan really well. That was the gift that we didn't expect, that just has been enormous for us, because she was the city manager of Columbia Falls, helped institute their resort tax area there, and has been our partner in this since September of 2024, I think, and kind of the best gift we could find. Jay, you want to speak about compliance for our short-term rentals? That's a big deal, and that's a success story. Can you talk about that briefly?
Yeah, sure. So we ventured into a lot of tall grass in the field, right? I mean, and thanks to everybody in this room that we were able to reach out to, you kind of helped us chart the course. And I want to open with that because what it taught me about this group is that as a member, I owe it to move forward with others. That's my job now. That's what you all did for us. And I've taken that now, and when I get calls or I'm asked for help from others, my job is to help others. The advice is worth what you pay for it, but that's what we do as a group is support each other. We were blessed to get Susan Nicosia to come on board, and she and I put together a plan of how we were going to go out and drive compliance. And it was interesting how it developed. We would give a report each month when we got together of how many homes, rental homes and such, we were now attracting and getting information from and getting signed up, right? And part of the unknown was we really didn't know how many people were renting homes, right? It just, you think, the state wasn't extremely interested in sharing some of the information that they may have had in the very beginning. They were going through enough turmoils with what was going on with the state tax bases. And so a lot of it was, hey, we had to kind of start taking a look at individual HOAs and getting some self-reporting and getting people who would say, yep, we know that these people do this. Compliance came rather quickly, rather good, and I would say that we're probably at about 98% compliance. Are there some that drift? Yeah, because we've got homes that are being sold on the mountain all the time, so they're being taken off the rental pool and sometimes being put on. So we got to keep up to speed on that. I would say the businesses, which there are not a lot of, there's one big one, but the smaller businesses, the compliance, that took a little while. That's where we had a couple people stumble, and oh gee whiz, I thought I sent that in, you know, you'd have some of those things. So we'd go out and have some conversations. We'd select who we're gonna have talk to, and we ran into a situation of compliance where we had a business that was in the city of Whitefish that delivered product to Big Mountain. And as the rules say, if that product is delivered and that product is paid for on the mountain, that's where the tax should be collected and sent. The owner of the business didn't see that as being right, and that's fine. I mean, it's a business. But we reached out to our friends in Whitefish and said, you know, we've got an opportunity here, and they graciously opened their doors. We had a meeting, put together a plan of identifying such businesses and what we would do in working together with such businesses. And it opened my eyes to the fact that, wow, not only can you get good information from team members here, but they're really willing to work with you and make sure the compliance is good, and that everything remains legal. So I thank our friends in Whitefish for that, because it was very enlightening to see that sort of thing. And I don't know how many of you are close to other resort area districts where you have that opportunity. We have that opportunity in Columbia Falls. There's a business in Columbia Falls that also services Big Mountain, same kind of product base. So there's some overlapping, but the overlapping from a compliance issue is, you know, if you take it as a, we're going to take our time, we're going to help you be compliant. We're not putting a big hammer out there. We just want to show you why this is working and how this is working. We were able to get everyone to come along on the journey, and I'm happy to say that because of that, we were able to go to our largest business, which is Big Mountain, Whitefish Mountain Resort, and say, here's the compliance we have in place. Here are the numbers we have in place. And these people are paying the same bed tax and same resort tax that you are. So they don't have a leg up on the resort. And the resort was really looking for fairness. Make sure that everybody is fair and is being paid. And because we did that, it was our first entry into, I think, opening up the relationship and showing the resorts that we are a partner and we are there for them. And so compliance led us down the road to some things that I didn't think initially was going to be a benefit to us, but it really was, because the people all saw, oh, this is kind of how it works. This is the way it's going to be, and I'm going to keep getting letters until I sign them and get compliant and get my tax base started. And we'll just do that every year. We're just going to keep on it and keep things moving. So it's the compliance piece moved right along.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
What percentage of your nightly rentals are owned by an owner that's not a local, that's, from, 2-3 states away? They own, that.
I don't have a specific answer to that question. I couldn't tell you the percentage. I would tell you that we've seen a majority of our renters using agencies, and the agencies is the local piece for us.
Yeah.
That's where we get the local. We have one individual I know that has 7 homes that they rent, and they kind of do it. That's their gig. But that's really rare. Most of them just flip on automatically and go with some type of a property manager.
Yeah, I do want to thank Gina, because she built the communications that Jay is describing, that looks at how do you explain to a vendor who does business in Whitefish and on the mountain what the rules are. It's very, very clear. It's available on your website. It's available on ours. Nice piece of work. So if you have that kind of conflict, or sharing opportunity, please look at that. Diana, any comment, secretary's job when you're building a new thing, this is a startup, right? For those of you who've been engaged in private sector startups, it's exactly what we're doing. You're stealing a lot of IP from others. Diana has taken a role not just in stabilizing the stuff as a secretary and trying to keep the board chair in line. By the way, I should note that every member of our board, and I mean this in all positive ways, has been willing to give the chair advice on how to do a better job of guiding meetings and things go faster and better. Got to be willing to do that, right? That's a huge gift that I'm grateful for. Diana's also been the one to help us understand, making sure, because you've attended more of the workshops on making sure we're transparent and we're legal and we're maintaining standards and educating us. So that's been a very big deal. Our last major job is getting our granting process underway. We're going to use GLM software to do that because that is complementary to what's going on in the whitefish community. And so we'll have actually potential, folks who are receiving grants from Whitefish Community Foundation, possibly from the City of Whitefish and ourselves, and they can use the same system, which is, I think, a really nice thing. Thanks to all of you who shared data about your approaches. So shocking news, we're right where we're supposed to be. Actually, we couldn't be happy about that. Tomorrow, we do a preliminary review and a public hearing on our budget. And more importantly, we approve our interlocal with the fire department. And I gotta tell you, that's a time for celebration for us. So we're excited. Any other questions? And by the way, we are all available to be helpful to you as you have been back with us.
Do the boundaries of Whitefish and the new district abut each other, or is there a gap? Just curious.
One spot, because, this is interesting, the city of Whitefish can actually annex the Big Mountain area once our boundaries were contiguous to the fire district, or the sewer district boundaries, so. I don't know, we're contiguous to the sewer district, I don't know if we're contiguous to the fire district unless they're the same boundaries, so we're close. But that's residential, it's one large landowner that really brought us closer. So, yeah, we're not contiguous, but that whole process, Whitefish had the resort tax since 1996. And so we've done a lot of interpretations on how and when we apply our resort tax. So when we started to have this issue, it was great working with Big Mountain to make sure that our interpretations didn't have to change that we had in place, and they were willing to work with us, and so we found the solution, and I think that was like huge success, because I don't think I thought about it happening, but I didn't really think about it happening, I guess, when they created the area, and now it's like, well, we were able to solve that together, and I think that's one of the things, just every resort, community district area, I think we all have a really good understanding, like we want resort tax to be successful, and we make sure that we are. And so thanks to Big Mountain Group too for the working with us to help us make sure we didn't have to go through some significant changes on our side with that type of interpretation. So.
And with like the last 30 seconds, because I see the hook is we've done a lot of stakeholder engagement early. So we reached out to the groups that we were expecting to see reaching out to us for grants a couple of years ago. We've had strong participation from potential grant recipients over the last couple of years in our meetings. They've actually given us very good information, very good intelligence that has guided our appropriations ordinance, guided some of our decisions. So they're partners. We're not at a granting point yet, but reaching out, being proactive to those folks has been actually very worthwhile for us. And we'll see what that means. But some very good insights. So there are a lot of people willing to help. There's some people willing to cause you some anxiety over time, which you have all dealt with too. But once you get over, the final thing is, we share a valley together between the three entities here at Columbia Falls. So we host the mountain. The mountain hosts us, the resort. But the people in the valley from Big Mountain, Columbia Falls, Whitefish, Kalispell, everywhere else, those are also stakeholders for us. And all of us have to be able to, because we're imposing a tax on them. We all have to demonstrate value back to those other folks in the valley, because they're working 2 and 3 jobs to help us all have fun up on the mountain. So that's incumbent upon us. I hope you see that in our grants. I think you've seen that, some of the things that Whitefish has done and Columbia Falls have done. And the best.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you all.
You have a question? No. Any other questions for our friends up here at Big Mountain?
Ron, what other recipients are you thinking about for granting besides the fire station?
So, we will expect, applications from Dream. That's our adaptive ski organization on the mountain. Huge part of our community up there too, by the way. 250 volunteers, a lot of them come from there. The Nordic Club, has some stuff adjacent to us. The ski teams have things, the ski patrol has things. I'm gonna look over it. Excuse me, Housing Whitefish. We've been talking to, they've been very present, because we made it clear in our administrative ordinance and in our ballot measure that workforce housing was a priority for us. We have to help the people who, serve to make the district and make the resort work. So Housing Whitefish is heavily engaged. Who am I missing? There's others.
I'm, it's gonna be interesting to see who applies. And I think we're gonna, I hope that we're surprised by some that take a look at coming in and seeing us. We have a very active race team that is there, and I know that they feel they're a little bit behind the 8 ball with what's going on with Dream, right? Dream is building a $24 million lodge up at the ski area, so 14 couple mil. So there's things that are going on. I'll be really surprised if WSI doesn't come with some ideas in mind, specifically around workforce housing.
And my view, maybe a year from now, is we could use a full-time deputy on the mountain. There's a lot of activity that goes on there that I learned more and more about. And we are uniquely situated to be able to fund that, should that proposal come forward, and work with the county to do that. Yeah.
I was gonna ask, you were talking about waiting to see what applications come in, but you also mentioned the ballot language, because in order for you to be able to use it, it has to be something that the voters approved in their ballot language.
Correct.
Have you had anything that you've seen yet or that's come up that you thought, oops, we wish we had included that in our ballot language, which we haven't? Because for a lot of the new folks starting out, that might be useful insight. You don't want to necessarily make it blanket open then, because people are resistant to the idea, but if you had anything that you didn't include in your ballot language that you're thinking, whoops, I wish we had, because Red Lodge changed ours after 20 years to include operations of parks, because we could build parks, but we couldn't spend any money to maintain them, for instance. So we could buy a new park, but we just couldn't change the oil in it.
I'm looking up from my president. Our ballot language is probably the broadest in the state by intent. And we did not link percentages to specific investment amounts. So it speaks to public safety and emergency services and workforce housing and some other things, and other things that may benefit the district. So that the challenge for us is we have to make sure we can't grant wholesale to the ballot. We're not Whitefish Community Foundation or other foundations. The work has to touch the district in a meaningful way. So our transit organization, the business association that runs the shuttle buses to and from the mountain, they may see funding, and they've been engaged to it for neglected down. But it's because they have an anchor point. They bring people in and out. So it's got to touch us somehow.
But it also sounds like your language included a broad statement or other services that may benefit the district.
Correct.
It's pretty broad, so.
It's pretty, very intentionally so, because we didn't know. We don't know what's going to happen. But I think our language is good, and we're using the stated terms, public safety and so forth, as our guiding principles. But there may be some corner cases for things that we could invite. We have $500,000 this year, but we're building our cash reserve. A year from now, we may have more like 750,000 to do.
Yeah, I mean, we're evolving, all right? I mean, there's a lot of new things going on with this board. I think that when some of us joined, and came on, the idea was, oh gee whiz, there's some things that I'd really like to see happen here in the community. I can really help drive them forward. Well, that's not really my job. My job is to, if people have questions and there's some ways in which we can help them to understand that they can provide some things to us and we can help them out, that's great. And I think that after what we've seen with the ski industry, and the problem that some other states have had this past year with snow conditions, it's not a guarantee. This money flowing through a ski resort is and where we're all about, right? I mean, if the tram and the gondolas don't run at Big Sky, the money changes quite drastically, just like it does ours even more, right? So we don't have to invest all this money immediately into the community either. I mean, there's nothing there that says, gee whiz, all of the money that we've gotten for grants has to be put into grants this year. It's really going to be I think a process of learning and deciding what is best for the community and what the board feels is best. And I'm looking forward to some, I hope, are some really good sales presentations.
I think the unique part of your area is the number of voters and just the different, like when you're on a mountain like that, if Whitefish put and other, we wouldn't pass that. But for a small community that, up on a mountain where you have the very few long-term residents, but they see the benefit of this, I think it's easier to put that and other, than like a community like Whitefish where you have more of a bigger, voter pool and
More skeptics.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, and that's really neat that you're able to keep it open because, it would be great for us to be able to do that if we had a need. But ours is very specific because that's how you get through bigger communities, I think.
Two things, our votes for creating the district of 58 to 10 resounding, numbers, percentage wise, not so much total wise. And then for the second election for the tax was actually 78 to 10. So we converted 20 people somewhere out there. The other thing is, as you know, resort area districts are not required to provide property tax relief. We do have that in our measure. The proponents of this issue before our involvement were selling that idea. So there was kind of a moral obligation. By the way, paying for our fire department is a property tax relief. So in our appropriations ordinance, we came up basically a month ago, finalized that we would give between 5 and 10% of our total revenues into some form of property tax relief mechanism, TBD. I'm perfectly satisfied with that. I would have been concerned with a number that went above that. And right now, preliminary budget calls for 5%. So.
All right, here comes the hook.
Yep.
Well, congratulations to all of you. You've done an amazing job of standing this up. We'll take a 5-minute bio break, get a refill of coffee, use the restroom, and we'll meet back here at 9:45 for a conversation around the legislative session and an update on the sales tax conversation. So I'll take a 5-minute break and we'll be back at 9:45.
Thanks. Late as usual.
That's my line. I did try to drive, I didn't realize that town north Andy was closed on Tuesdays.
So this is something you're.
Well, we know that we bought that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You would say. We're somebody is we want.
Yeah, and these are for you. Three nonprofits in our fire department have come together.
Ready,
I don't, you notice that one was doing the, presenter has to present, here's an outlaw.
They get this great.
I gave my opinion. There is, and if it was, but it was last year, everything asking what they were doing. So. I remember, the kitchen was open up, we went back, we did the whole. Yeah. That was the way to do it. Yeah. I know now, I'm very see, you know, kind of get out the language. Are the business the adults
We're looking at it, really up the deck from the buffers. Yeah. Downward.
Last year.
We got this, so these are now both showing the same thing rather than showing like the next slide. It was in that spot, so I'll show you that. Hopefully, if she's recording it, that's what she's getting here. Yeah, I saw the record button come up, so and it's still recording. I'll see if she's. Yeah.
That's one really came about was saying. Working with the forces. One of the forces.
Yeah. Longer before. Just turn that.
And he has to, and he was some of these things, there was issues with this lives. So I see.
And then we have. Yeah.
Now, sales here is. That hustle is forced or the voting not. It's pretty. So there's also just.
You turn that on, so is that just put it in your pocket?
Yeah.
I clicked it, Jackie, this is Dave. Yeah. I mean, is there anything? Yeah, exactly. That's what I.
Yeah, it's just.
Okay, perfect. That's probably the best for. Yes, yeah.
He said that would cause an agency. About returns all the way up to this.
You can get lost too. Things are, you just get lost and then restart it.
So there's trees that.
There you go. No, there we go.
That, exactly, these points. You know, said, for. You now. I remember that.
And I can see it if it doesn't stop. Yeah, yeah. Then you can got my text it my phone. Text it something. Yeah.
And then that, so the fire department's down there.
All right, if everyone can make your way back to seats, we're gonna go ahead and get started here, Jack.
Thanks.
So the purpose of this session is really to hopefully open a conversation with you all. It's going to be somewhat of an informal session, but more of a Q&A, and hopefully we can provide some quick tips and tricks as to engaging your legislative body that is within your own independent communities. And why that really matters is, I think everyone in this room is aware that the state of Montana does not have a statewide sales tax. I think that's been a pretty prevalent discussion that has happened over the years. But what we wanted to do was really engage each of you in your own independent communities and give you some tips and tricks on how you may be able to engage with your own local legislators. And that's important because we're able to kind of share with your voted of legislators what's happening in your communities, what your values are, why the resort tax is important, and building those relationships. And that's really more than anything what it comes down to is helping to be a voice for your own independent communities. And collectively through this association, the opportunity that we have is really to bring the conversation forward in a way that we're doing it together and speaking to the power of resort tax to our legislative body and ensuring that first and foremost, we're protecting that resort tax. I think all of us would agree that this is a very powerful financing mechanism for our tools. And the last thing we would want to do is to lose that. And so what we wanted to do today was just kind of frame the conversation for you all and why we're having this conversation. Finally kind of out in front of this now as a group. We have a legislative subcommittee here within the Resort Tax Association. I think you, I, and Dan, and maybe Richard is on the legislative subcommittee. So with that, I'll turn it over to our lobbyist, Daryl James, to kind of kick us off here and dive in a little deeper on legislative stuff.
Sure. So for those that have not met, I've at least seen most of you online, but met very few of you in person. My name is Daryl James. I live in Helena. Been there almost 30 years, moved up from Denver. My background is all in kind of regulatory compliance, planning, environmental compliance for big infrastructure, energy, natural resource development type projects. Really got into the government affairs side about 25, gosh, probably closer to 30 years ago, when I realized that most big public infrastructure projects can be designed well by any engineering firm, but it's that social and political barrier that stops a lot of important infrastructure projects from moving forward. So I kind of moved into the political realm, for good or worse, I'm not sure. And have been doing government affairs work for a lot of infrastructure, local government type clients for the better part of the last 20 years. So that's how I kind of got into this realm, and particularly interested in the resort tax. I headed up the Montana Infrastructure Coalition for a number of years, focused on the fuel tax increase back in 17, and then really started looking at the challenges for local government to fund police and fire protection and road and bridge improvement projects, water sewer projects with a pretty minimal or limited source of revenue at the local government level. All that burden being on the backs of your local property taxpayers, and then the state going, you guys charge too much in property tax. Well, then give us some more tools. So we really started that conversation about how do we fund local infrastructure? Is there a way to spread that burden? We have 12 million visitors to the state of Montana, and they pay a bed tax. They pay a small portion of our fuel tax. They pay a resort tax in limited areas, but they really have no other, local governments have no other source of revenue to pay for that tourism impact on local infrastructure, right? There's no other mechanism in the toolbox. So we started that conversation about, do we look at a statewide sales tax? Governor Gianforte said, yeah, funny, not happening under my watch. So we started talking about local option taxes. We'll let the voters do it. Look, we've got a great model in the resort tax. Can we do that statewide? Can we let anybody utilize that tool? We started that conversation in 17, a little more earnestly in 19, and have not gotten anywhere with that kind of a notion. And it's largely just the idea that if you do a local option sales tax, and this is conservative Republicans saying, look, if we allow a local option sales tax, you might pass it in Helena, you'll probably pass it in Great Falls, maybe in Butte, standard possibility in Billings or Kalispell, maybe in Bozeman. But if you pass it in 3 or 4 of those areas, you'll never pass the statewide sales tax. It's like, all right, well then, are you ready to have a statewide sales tax discussion? Well, not me, but yeah, we need to have that discussion, right? So that's the general tone of where we are with talking about sales taxes. I'll get to why that's important to you in a few minutes, but I want to get a little bit of a flavor for how much you guys are all engaged with either your area legislators or even the legislative process. If you're like routinely engaged kind of in the legislature with your area legislators. A couple, okay. Do we kind of want to walk through just
I think the
basic
building blocks would be helpful.
So obviously it meets every other year, right? In the odd years, a lot of discussion in recent years about breaking that up and having a budgetary cycle and a policy cycle. The vast majority of our bills, even if the policy have a legislative or a fiscal note, so that's pretty difficult in practice. So I think we're gonna see us stay on a biennial legislative session. I'll walk real quickly through the bill process. So if you have a House bill that comes in through a House committee, let's just say it's a local option or a resort tax bill that's going to go through the House Tax Committee, right? You'll have a hearing in the House committee. If it passes out of the House, there's two actual functions within that committee. They'll have a hearing, and then they'll take executive action on the bill. They'll vote on the bill. And then that goes to the floor of that chamber. So it goes to the House. There's a second reading. You read it across the roster, and that's a first reading. Second reading is a full hearing on the House floor. It's presented by the bill sponsor. And then there's a vote on that bill. And then a day or two later, depending on the overall agenda, they'll take another vote on that bill. So there's a second and a third reading, and if it passes that chamber, then it goes to the other side, it goes to the same process, goes to the Senate Tax Committee, and then two readings on the floor of the chamber. So if it gets through that whole process, then it goes to the governor's office for signature, right? So that's a real quick overview of the legislative process and how a bill becomes law. Any questions about that? Felt pretty straightforward. Anything else on that?
Before you pivot, how many senators are there and how many reps are there?
50 senators, 100 representatives. Senators have about 10,000 residents within their district. Reps would have about 5,000. So, and let's talk about the kind of the makeup of the legislature just real quickly. I was looking back to a presentation I gave to the architects and engineers about 10 years or 12 years ago. I can't remember what I said here. And it used to be kind of fun to watch the primaries and watch the general election because there were kind of toss-ups and, you know, you look at the measurable change in the makeup of the legislature. It's not really that fun anymore. No matter which side of the aisle you sit on, it's all pretty darn predictable with both redistricting and a little bit of just a change in the makeup of our electorate. But pretty close to a super majority in the House last session. That's largely going to remain intact. The Senate was quite a bit closer, and I'll delve into that in a second. I don't think we're going to see much of a shift in the makeup of Republican and Democrat seats in either chamber. What's going to be real interesting to watch will be the infighting within the GOP. You've got the Freedom Caucus members that are becoming more and more inflamed. I have no idea where they're getting that emboldened attitude. But they're really taking after what they call the nasty nine in the Senate. The moderate Republicans have sided with Democrats to pass reasonable, responsible legislation. So the nasty infighting within the GOP is disturbing, at least, and I think going to make for a difficult environment to pass reasonable legislation that's important to you guys, and we'll talk about why that's important. So I think the biggest threat is whether we lose that ability to work together, particularly in the Senate, and pass reasonable legislation, or if the far right of the Republican Party is able to browbeat folks into not passing anything or passing unreasonable legislation that even a moderating Supreme Court will strike down. So that's kind of the makeup of the legislature in a nutshell.
How do you apply to be a legislator? Like, do you have that background, or is it just normal folks?
I think it's a $25 application fee, and
a lack of common sense.
Yeah,
Kind of same way as being mayor.
for punishment. I'll tell a funny story just because it will resonate with so many folks up here. I came up. This had been probably in 16 for a candidate forum, and I think it was here in Columbia Falls. I was pegging Frank Garner because I wanted him to carry our fuel tax bill in 17. And I met a guy who was a former school board member in Whitefish, funny New England accent. And I'm like, super nice guy. He's going nowhere, right? No way this guy's going to win. Dave Fern is one of my favorite legislators of all time. He's a champion of common sense thinking and just a super legislator. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But see, you get people that are just like doers in the communities, and most of those guys run. Unfortunately, there's also people that are firebrands that are not being pushed in by kind of county officials and saying, "Gosh, you should for the central committees in the political parties." So it's becoming more hotly political rather than just folks that are motivated to help their communities.
And I will add, just as kind of, you talk about the Freedom Caucus and what's going, little old Red Lodge. I think we have a fantastic rep down there.
Brad Barker's a great guy.
Yeah, you want about somebody who does his homework and goes out there. Over $500,000 spent on a candidate that doesn't show up to the debates and does the only thing she said is I'll vote with that 22, you know. Brad Barker hates guns. That failed 22 to 78. I don't think Brad Barker was the reason that died, sort of a thing, but the amount of money they're spending and the rhetoric that goes along with it is just mind-boggling. You just cross your fingers and hope people do their homework.
Good point. Yes, sir.
So question, and I've always wondered this, because I've testified in a lot of committee hearings and everything. Does every bill that comes into the committee hearing get to go to the full Senate, or can it die in committee? Because I have testified in numerous committee meetings where there'll be 50 fire chiefs saying this is a bad deal. Nobody speaks in favor of it except for the person who put the bill up, and it still passes on committee. How does that, can you explain that?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So let's go back to the mechanics of it. There's about, I think last session, close to 3,000 bills introduced, right? A fraction of those actually make it all the way through the process, but in a committee hearing, a local legislator, Brad Barker, carries a bill for constituents at a Red Lodge, right? Takes it into House Natural Resources, and gets a hearing. I'll be blunt and honest with you. The committee hearings are kind of a public show, right? The real work comes from you guys and myself talking with those individual legislators on the side, right? It's those meaningful personal interactions with legislators that make a difference. So you can have a spirited hearing or nobody shows up, right? The real work, the real moving of that needle is based on those individual conversations. So you can have 30 people show up in opposition to a bill, but an effective lobbyist and an effective team going in there and saying this is why it's important. It's going to come out of committee, right? And sometimes it's just that legislator pleading with his fellow committee members and saying, please just give me the opportunity to have this debate on the floor, right? So things that have wild opposition in committee can still make it to the floor based on a whole lot of factors. And more times than not, if it comes out of committee with a divided vote or with a active constituent opposition, it's likely going to die on the floor. But that sponsor just wants an opportunity to carry it out there. And a lot of times those things are called postcard votes. It's an opportunity to get it out on the floor and make that guy go on record as opposing your idea, whatever. So they know it's not going to pass, but they just want to be able to hold that over somebody for the next election cycle, right?
And you just mentioned important too, about the second and third vote. I know of a lot of votes where they'll say, give us a yes here, give us our chance to make the case. So you'll see somebody vote yes or no on a second vote and then change it on the third vote. And that's the conversation happening behind the scenes is give us a chance. And we gave you your chance, you didn't make your case.
Exactly. So, yeah. So that answers your question? Okay. Where do you want to go?
Keep rolling, however, I guess, last question, structural. So we're in an off session, how long does the session take, and when does it happen?
So it's a 90-day session by the Constitution. Those are 90 legislative days, not calendar days. So it completely depends on what leadership sets up. They may meet Monday through Friday, they may meet Monday through Saturday. Every day they're in session on the floor counts as a full legislative day. So it generally runs from that first week of January through middle of May. And that's kind of where it is. They don't have to expend the full 90 days. Either chamber can call for sine die, which is close of the session. Then the other chamber has to vote on that. There's been a lot of gamesmanship, surprisingly, around calling sine die. Last session or 2 sessions ago, big battle over Medicaid. And one of the chambers surprisingly voted to sine die. The House did it, and then the Senate kind of got snookered into to sine die before some bills had come back up from the second floor, and there was you remember the whole kerfuffle there. So there's a lot of gamesmanship that's really annoying and kind of unsavory that happens during the legislative session. That doesn't help constituents, doesn't help you, but it's pretty darn fun for the leadership on both sides of the aisle. I think it's cute and entertaining, but it's pretty obnoxious in my view. But
I think Montana's the only state that has a citizen-led legislature. Is that correct, or one of yours?
Mine is one of the sole remaining, and let's talk a little bit about that. I think it's noble in concept, but in practice you have, and I don't mean this as to be derogatory to anybody, but we end up with a lot of retirees, a lot of ranchers that aren't working on anything because it's too cold in the winter to be cabbing or mending fences, or right, there's not a whole lot going on. So you get a pretty uniform group of folks in the legislature with not a lot of deep expertise and a lot of like highly complex issues, right? The other problem I see is with term limits in the legislature, with a citizen legislature, it really pushes the power and the brain trust to both the legislative and the executive branches. I think it hamstrings the legislature, frankly. By the time a legislator really figures out how it works and how to navigate it and how to negotiate with people, they either have to move to the other chamber or they've spent their 12 to 16 years up there and it's time to move on. More times than I'm going to favor term limits. I'm going to suggest that the reason you like term limits is because you can't believe that they keep sending that clown back from circle, right? Or you generally like your own legislator, right? I can't believe those guys keep sending that idiot back up here that's gets in the way of stuff. To me, it's kind of I think it's lazy voting. It's like, but either engage and try to change stuff, but let those idiots send who represents them, right? It's unfortunate that we get some clowns up there, but for whatever reason, those constituents in that area have decided that's who they want to represent them, and we should let that happen. I think at the congressional level, we've seen people. I always think back to Strom Thurmond, who spent 112 years in the Senate, but that there might be a point at which it's too long. But again, I mean, if it's a true representative democracy, we probably ought to let that go. I think the reality is, again, with term limits, I think we reduce the effectiveness long term of the legislature itself. But that's my take on that.
Can I offer one observation with the other big problem and having spent a lot of time down in Helena getting things through the legislature, particularly the 1995 change to the resort tax bill. What's happened in the legislature in Montana, we've seen it session after session after session, is it's essentially become the appellate court for people that feel aggrieved by what we do as cities. And the issue ends up being, it's like we do something as a city, people don't like it. They get their local legislator to go ahead and carry a bill that reverses whatever it is we did that they didn't like. And unfortunately, for the people that are in the legislature in Helena, we see very, very few with any municipal experience, right? Like almost none. So that's why we keep seeing all of our powers as cities stripped away, even though they're the same people that say they don't want the federal government telling them what to do, and they're all about local control until it's somebody that actually wants to exercise local. And it kills us. And it's been a steady erosion for the last 30 years, basically.
It is an interesting thing to watch. I mean, local governments are a subset of the state, right? So your authorities are dictated by the state. But the ideology has been interesting to watch here over the last 20 years. I think just kind of an interesting aside when you look at policies that are effective for local government. I mean, it takes one story to go, oh my gosh, this is a huge problem. And I think of the TIF districts and the battles that's been ongoing with TIF for the last number of years. And everybody points to one large Western Montana community as an abuser of TIF districts, and all of a sudden it's a horrible tool that needs to be taken off the books. So that would be one of my cautions, and it'll be part of our discussion later is when we come in with a legislative concept, we need to have real stories and have a very clear message on why it's important to your local community and to your constituents. And then kind of separate yourself from whatever the real issue is that has brought that to the legislature. We're not all doing that, or there's a way to fix that without just completely wiping this off the books, right? So you're absolutely right. Local governments have had a target on their backs, and I think it goes essentially to the conversation we want to have about sales tax. Undeniably, people are concerned about increasing property taxes, right? It's one of the number one issues in Montana. Interestingly, if you look at Montana's tax structure, we have two legs of the stool. We have an income tax and a property tax. Most of our neighboring states have three legs of the stool. They also have a sales tax. When you look at the overall tax burden in Montana, our property tax burden is really no higher than most of our neighboring states, and we're right about in the middle compared to every state in the nation, right? So we don't have a hugely obscene property tax burden, but there's this perception that's been repeated over and over and over again, to where people are like, "Oh my gosh, my property taxes are out of control." It's not reality, and I finally got Greg Hertz to say that on the record a couple of years ago. In a public forum, it's just like, okay, so can we change the dialogue? Apparently not, but so that's still the pervasive notion, is that our property taxes are out of control, they're too high, and local governments are spending like drunken sailors. We have to change that perception and talk about how you're reasonably spending property tax revenues, providing valuable services in your communities. So I think that's part of our challenge. And part of how we need to make sure the message gets across, particularly on something like a resort tax, what it's being spent for, how it's helping locals, even when it's not explicitly for property tax reduction. How are we capturing revenue from other people to make sure that property taxes aren't increasing as fast as they might otherwise? So
it's complicated. Property taxes are really confusing to the general citizen. Sales tax is pretty straightforward, but
right.
That's a good lead in to, I think, to like what's going on with the property tax conversation. It's been, I think, our guiding star since we've started this association. But you want a seat at the table when that conversation is happening. What are you seeing?
So let's start back. And I've got a 40-slide presentation that should take the next 40 minutes or something. I'll take questions at the end, but I'm just kidding. It's like you just look down. Don't ask me. So I want to go back to 1999 with the big bill. This is when, if you think about how your tax revenues shifted dramatically with entitlement share and all that kind of stuff. There's a complete restructuring of local government revenues. I really think, and I've talked to Bob Story, who was in the legislature at the time, head of Montax. Hopefully you guys know Bob. If not, we need to get him in front of you guys sometime in the next 6 months. A good idea. The notion there was to kind of limit, that's when 1510-420 came into being, right? The limited growth in local government revenues. The background notion was we're going to restrict property taxes so that we can force a conversation about a statewide sales tax. Almost 30 years later, we still have not had a real meaningful conversation about statewide sales tax, right? Dorothy Bradley and Mark Roscoe started that conversation. There was an uproar, and they both went, "Well, yeah, not me." That's the last time we really started to tread on a serious discussion about a statewide sales tax. Since then, we've been nibbling around the edges of property tax, right? And it really started coming to a head probably 3 sessions ago. People really started complaining about property taxes, that they're out of control, local governments are out of touch. We've seen ballot initiatives, we've seen pieces of legislation that want to basically adopt California proposition, I can't come up with the number right now. That basically cap an increase in property tax revenues in general, or cap a percentage increase. So those are the kinds of things that are happening right now. Last session, we did away with the 15-cent 420, allowed for more of a market related increase in property taxes, but an overall cap. So they're playing around with stuff, but just on residential, right? So all that did is shift the tax burden to commercial, industrial, ag, anybody else that's not residential. And start with with this. Lou Jones was talking about the Wayfair court decision that said, we can have a sales tax on brick and mortar or on internet sales if you have some kind of brick and mortar location. He started down this path of thinking, we're going to put enough pressure on the local governments that they will start this conversation about a statewide sales tax. Let's start putting downward pressure on revenues. They'll have that conversation. It never happened, right? So this past session, they're like, okay, screw it. Let's put the pressure on the business community, and then they'll come out of their shoes and they'll start the conversation. I think that was the impetus for this property tax shift that they passed this last session. I've been in a number of business or chamber of commerce meetings over the last year, and the mining community is like, it didn't really hurt us that bad. Linear infrastructure essentially assessed. They're coming out of their shoes, except somebody like Northwestern Energy is like, we pass on our tax bill. So increase our taxes, it's going straight on the ratepayer's bill. So we need to think about the mechanics of how this stuff works, right? And I don't think the legislature thought that through very well, or they just counted on the fact that the business community is going to come up and say, all right, let's do a statewide sales tax. Chamber of Commerce is doing a statewide tour. They've been on the trail for the last year, just trying to take a pulse and see where we're going to go with the notion of a statewide sales tax. It's not being warmly received anywhere, but the needle is moving a little bit.
Did they do it? They did a poll. Is that right?
They've done a poll, and it's still, it's tightening, but I mean, it used to be a 70-30 issue, and it might be 60-40, 55-45, but it's still a non-winning issue statewide, and that's why the governor's just like, look, I'm not even going to entertain this. Maybe in his last year or two, we can have a conversation about it, but I'm not that.
That's the comment I remember is that sounds like a stupid thing for a first term governor to bring up
Absolutely.
was the quote I heard, but
Yeah.
that's the first time I've ever heard somebody explain why somebody thought it was a good idea to cap growth at 1/2 the rate of inflation. I was like,
Right.
And that's 25% purchasing power we've lost since that came in.
Exactly. And it was literally a whether it was thoughtful or not, it was intentional to say, if people are concerned about property tax, let's limit it. And then when they start feeling the pain, we'll have that conversation about state sales tax. And I remember having a conversation with a representative of local governments as part of the infrastructure coalition and saying, you know what, maybe it is time to say we can't do more with less, right? I mean, that's the mantra. So start cutting services. Well, we can't do that. Well, if you really can do more with less, then we don't have to leg to stand on here in this conversation, right? So until the voter feels the pain, I think I think something has to break.
Which happened in Colorado.
It did.
Right? And
Yeah.
so all of a sudden cities were shutting off streetlights.
Exactly.
People are like, what? Why? Well, we can't raise our taxes because of the new laws. So it does happen. And that's how I think that
It is.
it happens.
The Tabor Amendment went in, actually in the late 80s, early 90s, I can't remember. I don't think that was in effect for 7 years before they had to pause it for like 2 years and say, okay, everybody catch back up, fill the potholes, fix the lights, fix your water sewer, but then we're reimposing it because it was working, right? It's like, no, it doesn't work. But they had to pause it after, less than a decade because it was crippling local governments. So I think California and Colorado have real life examples of how a strict property tax cap does not work. So, and the local voters finally get it and say, all right, let's fix this, let's get back to reality.
So there a quick question
Yeah.
on that. How do we effectively convey to everyone that lives in our communities that we're only 25% of that problem? 75% is the state and schools. I mean, that's the percentage of your tax bill that municipalities impose.
Right.
But yet we're the ones that get beat up at budget time, and we're the ones that get beat up down in Helena. Like, that's gonna fix the problem. How do we convey that message, I guess, on a more statewide basis? I mean, we know it as municipal officials, but nobody else does.
Right. It's stunning to me. I took pie charts that literally come out of the state's biennial report, right? So you would think that legislators are somewhat familiar with that. But if you've seen that, it's a pretty beefy report. Comes out every 2 years. Maybe a little bit difficult to digest. And again, it goes back to our citizen legislature, and most of these guys have probably never cracked the cover of that thing, right? But I think it is important, and we did this with the Infrastructure Coalition numerous times, particularly in tax committees on both the House and Senate side, to show that pie chart and say anywhere from 60 to 80% of the local property tax revenue burden is schools, right? K through 12 schools. Another 2 to 3% is the 95 mills that the state imposes.
The equalization, yeah.
Exactly. And then the remainder is city and county, right? And it's, I can't remember what the percentages are, but they're roughly equal. County is a little bit smaller than city in most areas, urban areas. I put together kind of a detailed breakdown, and it started making local governments nervous on kind of where the local dollars were spent, particularly from an infrastructure investment, and we should talk about that from an infrastructure investment standpoint. For me to stand at the podium and say, you know, we need more flexibility in property taxes to pay for roads, bridges, water, sewer, emergency service type stuff. When larger portions, I mean, that was on average probably about 3% of a local government budget, right? So that becomes a real difficult conversation to have. You need to be prepared to talk about where that money is spent at the local level. When your administration budget looks really big, or when your categories are too broad. I mean, when miscellaneous makes up 20 to 30% of your budget, there might be 84 things in there, but that looks like a slush fund, right? So I think being prepared to have those very specific conversations about where the stresses are on your local budget, and being prepared to go into detail. I looked at my utility bill and what makes up the utility bill for Northwestern Energy, and it's very explicit. And even my property tax bill, the school calculation is very explicit. County is pretty explicit. City government is very broad and general. So that's something I think you could all think about and maybe address, is really be more explicit on how that tax revenue is being spent and what value it provides to your constituents. Because just as I started trying to put together a story, it's like, wow, this is kind of hard to tell. It's not a real compelling story.
And it could be because, you know, when you look at how GASB and GAP, all of that works, you've got your police fund that's in your general fund. But you might not see it.
Right.
We actually keep ours separated out of our property tax supported funds for wages alone. Over 60% goes to police and fire only.
Right.
I mean, and so it is, and that's more than the property tax we collect, by the way.
Exactly.
We pay 7 million in wages, we collect 5 million in property tax.
Right.
And so those kind of stories, and I think this is kind of getting to how you need to engage with your legislators individually, because you can really teach them things. Representative Bennett, she was new. She reached out to me. First time I've had a Republican reach out to me at the city of Whitefish. Met with her. She's excellent. She's probably not liked by her party now, is what I'm hearing, but she wanted to learn about our budget, learn about how we do property taxes. And then during the session, she would text me, hey, what do you think about this bill? What do you think about that bill? Senator Byrne, now I was called representative because it's like ingrained in my brain, but Senator Byrne, he he's been there a long time. He's learned, he's super intelligent. He'll reach out with questions, but usually I'm kind of sharing more with him. Whereas I found just meeting with Representative Bennett before the session was super helpful because she would tell me, how is this gonna affect Whitefish? How is it gonna affect you? And I think she also worked with Columbia Falls pretty well. Not all legislators are that eager to learn. Former Senator Regier, I reached out to him multiple times, never heard from him before. And so it's really dependent on how willing those legislators are to learn. Quite honestly, or if they're just gonna stick party line, I think, and they just listen to those that are in their party and have learned that way. But yeah, being able to articulate, especially for resort communities, what good we're doing with our resort tax, because every dollar of resort tax is a property tax, even in my mind, even in Big Sky, where you're not a city. Every road that we build would have been a property tax increase. Water and sewer are a little different because those are based on rates, but every park improvement, property tax relief in itself is naturally property tax relief. But all of those things, resort tax is property tax relief. And I think that's also an important thing to sell. And I might get into the sales tax conversation here in a minute, but I have some thoughts on that and how that actually could be bad for resort communities. And not just because of managing two taxes or how they would operate our tax. I think we generate a lot of revenue in our communities, we're resort communities, we generate revenue, so our money will be going to the east side of the state if they start looking at reducing property taxes as part of that.
So where's the starting point? I think, it just starting with who your local representatives are is really kind of the ground level starting point. And we asked the committee if they could pull together kind of a toolkit, if you will, for how we engage with these folks and what's important. So maybe we could walk through that. I think each of you has hopefully the one pager in front of you. And we can send out this is in the packet, right? So they send out this slide.
No, but we both.
Okay, we'll send this out, but I think it'd be worth taking a little bit of time just from the experience in the room. I know many of you have already engaged with legislators. We're in the off year. Now is the time for us to be really engaging those legislators and kind of moving the needle in terms of education. And I think more than anything, that's really what it is just helping the legislators understand this is my community and here's how it operates and here's some more detail about what's important to us. So I don't know if you guys want to kind of walk through the sheet that we have or what a good starting point is for toolkit.
I will say, before we get going through the toolkit, it was very interesting to talk to Senator Fern last night. We've been working with him for some time now, but in this off season, here we're saying, we're advocating for sure. We're going to advocate for what we want. They're asked all the time to do something. And so there's also a point of advocacy and then just building relationships, taking them out to dinner, taking them out for coffee. Hey, let's just meet. And kind of, I think what I got from that conversation last night was spend time with them talking about like what they want to see, let them actually share what they're doing, what they're seeing at the state, what they're seeing in their community, because they also talk to all their constituents. Before we're just like, this is what I need. This is what I need. I need you to help me with this. But if you build those relationships first, it's important. But again, why do we do it? Because we have a purpose eventually, but you got to build that relationship first before you take the first ask. At least that's kind of my thought.
Absolutely. No, I think effective advocacy is probably 20% just effective communication, but it's 80% you and your connection, your earnesty, your trustworthiness in conveying that message from your constituents. So building that trust, building that rapport with your area legislators is monumental in moving the dial. And I'm looking at the list here, which we'll go through in a minute, but you guys are actually pretty darn lucky with your representation in the legislature, comparatively speaking. So building trust with those guys, giving them the support they need to go in and start advocating on your behalf is step number one. So talking about how to get there.
Cool. Let's talk about how to get there. Okay.
Good expert.
All right. let's just kind of go through like how you do this. I think of the story that you guys need to tell, right? And I'll talk about the framework, and then I think we can talk about the specifics of your issues and what you need to do. When you start building a story for a legislator, excuse me, the first thing is to talk about need, right? What's the issue in your community that is either threatening to increase property taxes or that you simply can't fund under the current structure, right? And I think about the example you provided on about fire protection services, and that was the looming threat. A word of caution to all of you when you think about talking with locals, to me it's a little bit of a different message. You started talking about issues on the mountain that would really benefit, right? Don't ever tell it in the legislature, right? You've got a heavily right-leaning legislature that's going to resonate with. You're going to have to increase property taxes to take care of your roads, your schools, your local infrastructure. But as soon as you start talking about the fun stuff, you're going to lose support, right? That's at the legislature. If that's what sells at the local level, fine. But my caution is don't use that messaging at the legislature. It's got to be about hardcore bricks and mortar physical stuff that needs to be done in the community to keep you functioning, right? So painting that need picture, we have this pressing need. We either can't do it, or we're going to have to increase property taxes to get there, right? The better way to do this is to spread the cost around, be more creative, keep property taxes under control for our local constituents, and this is a great tool to do it, right? So establish that need, provide some of the facts, the details, the proof, the evidence of why this has become a pressing issue, right? Costs have increased, we can't keep up because of 1510 420, we're just naturally handicapped, we've got a change in population, whatever it is, right? Provide some details, some evidence on why it's a real factor. The motivation, the call to action. Why is this necessary right now? Why does it matter? And frankly, what effect does it have? If you can provide that compelling story about bond ratings for your fire protection, that's a compelling story, right? That has real economic impact, potential loss of service. So those compelling stories about what happens if we don't have this tool, what happens if we don't pass this piece of legislation, what happens if we don't aren't provided with this opportunity. The next part is that human element. It really is about the character that you put in front of the legislature. It's not character as in like who I am. It's the character, the person, the conveyor of your message that you put out there. I can go and talk to the legislature. I'm a trusted person in conveying your message, but it's you or your constituents that provide that meaningful connection back to that local community. So that storyteller, that person that conveys that story is critically important. So whether it's you or somebody in your community, a business owner, somebody that relies on an infrastructure, somebody that's paying the tax that says, hey, it's kind of a pain in the neck, but boy, does it pay dividends. I can see tangible benefits in my community. Those are the storytellers you want. I can plow the ground, but you guys have to go in there and plant those seeds and say, hey, this is why it's important and why it's broadly supported in our community. The story itself has to be compelling and personal. And frankly, I think the level of detail is fairly important. Again, not to the granular, but enough detail that when they're pressed in a committee hearing or on the floor, they've got enough background that they can defend it and be successful in convincing their colleagues that this is the right path forward. And frankly, in any storytelling, tie your clothes back to the need and just re-stress why this is important and necessary to make sure that we maintain a resort tax, that we make sure that it's that they continue to be dependent on your back, right? So I think that's what I would say just on the importance of storytelling, the importance of engaging and building that relationship, that trust, and arming your legislators with the story that they need to carry into the legislative session.
And do that before the session even gets started, you know, like come December, they're getting ready to move. I think that's the biggest thing is that session's going, it is so fast paced. They're getting thousands of emails, so those conversations before the session are super important. Yes, you know, sending emails, sending letters, reaching out to them, giving them phone calls is great during the session, but I just know from speaking with them that they're like, yeah, you know, we're just getting so many emails, it's hard for us to track them or read them all quick enough. And so that part is super important to do before they're sitting up there at the legislature.
I would also add that you're a familiar face then when the legislature
Yeah.
kicks off and you're coming in kind of warm instead of completely cold, and I think that's helpful because you build trust. So what's the starting point? Schedule a coffee, like what's
Let's kind of go through the message first.
Perfect.
Then I want to spend some time on, because frankly, we're at kind of an awkward time to start those conversations. We got a primary coming up here in a couple of weeks. And then you've got a heavy campaign until November. So there's probably a couple of windows to really hit, and it depends on the status of your legislator. And we'll walk through that in detail with each one of you. So, let's go to the most important message. I think somebody said this earlier about, you know, particularly the GOP used to be about local control and devolving down to government closest to the people. For whatever reason, that apparently is no longer like real convincing to at least the fringe of the Republican Party. But I still think that's an important message. Even when we tried to push the boulder uphill with the local option sales tax, a number of Republicans were, and I keep harping on the Republicans, not based on any bias, because I tend to be more fiscally conservative anyway, but they're just not convinced that any tax increase is good policy, right? But when you can tell that story and say, look, you're not increasing anybody's taxes, whether a resort tax or a local option tax, you're empowering local government or local constituents, local voters to decide whether they want to impose a tax on themselves. I think that's probably one of the most central arguments that you have, and any kind of a local option sales tax discussion is nobody can blame you, legislator, for increasing taxes. You are simply empowering Montanans to decide for themselves whether they want to vote in property tax relief, additional revenue sources that have the potential to put downward pressure on property taxes that will pay for essential services and facilities within the communities. Those to me are some of the core messages, but I'd love to hear from you guys on when you passed it in the conversations in your communities, what you think resonate, why people continue to support Whitefish has always been a great example for me that I talk about all the time. How many times have you reapproved your resort tax?
Reapproved it for extensions at least twice. And then we've done reallocations, but in the past 5 years, at least 3 times. I think
At least
we've
3
done
times in the last 5 years, I think 5 times total.
I think so, yeah.
And we passed with a higher percentage
Every time.
approval than we have every time, pretty much.
Yeah,
Because we originally passed at 52%.
wow, you just barely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me,
That was a door-to-door campaign. We literally went door to door.
And there's generally a couple of fails before you get to that pass. And then
Nope.
improves after that. Okay,
No, passed first time.
so to me, I'd love to hear your perspective from a actual local on the ground, but when I'm making this pitch at the legislature, it's 25% rebate or it's not a reduction in tax, but 25% of the revenues goes towards property tax reduction, right? The other flip side of that is tangible improvements, tangible investments in the community that people can point to and say, that's where that revenue went to. That's where my tax dollar went to. And more importantly, it's where the visitor's tax dollar went to, right? They know that they didn't put the entire bill, and they did see some tangible decrease in property tax, and it's on the tax bill. I think that's huge. What else can you attribute to why it's experienced so much support?
I think for Whitefish, the monitoring committee has been great because we have local residents, business owners that are sitting on that committee. Every time we brought something forward, I think we've gone through them. And we've always tied it to a very specific need. When we went from 2% to 3%, which was a huge, that's a big deal. It's just like almost like a whole new vote to add resort tax, not just a reallocation. You know, it had to do with something that would impact them if they didn't do it, and it was our water source. And if they didn't protect the water source, your rates were going up. And so there was this, you know, finding those things that the community really cares about. Whitefish cares about parks. We have now, we went from 5% to 10% to support our parks. Well, now we just add maintenance, to maintenance and infrastructure and improvements. Streets is a huge part of our resort tax. And I've only been at the city 12 years, but Doug's been on the committee since the early 2000s. Andy's been here, I don't know how long, forever. But you know, you guys have probably, he's been our mayor, he's been a counselor, he's done all. But you guys have been here since the inception, and so I'd like to hear from you what you think, why our resort.
Streets were our big sell.
Yeah.
Because our streets were hammered. I mean, we literally were stumped out. I mean, we had we paved like right over stumps. We had wood sticking through the streets. And one of the ones, and I think we even had like a picture of it one time, but there was a chuck hole on Baker on the west side of City Hall, the old City Hall. And I mean, cars would literally get stuck in that pothole. Remember that? It would get icy in the winter, and a low slung car would get a wheel down in there without studs or something. And I mean, it would literally sit there and spin, and people would have to get out and push it out of the chuck hole. And we just had no way to fix the streets. Right. And they were hammered. And so that's the thing we really did sell. You know, we sold that, and then we sold the 25% property tax rebate. And then we sold that we would be making the decisions via a committee of citizens. And specificity was the other big part of it for us too. I mean, we're like, and then the other thing is we could do 3%, but we only went with 2% the first time. And we said, hey, look, we can go higher, but we're not even going to go higher. We're only going to go with 2%. And that was a big selling point too. That was kind of more important, I think, for the business community. And, you know, we've always had retail leakage out of Whitefish. We continue to have it. We've always had it at something, but that was the greatest fear right away. It was like, everybody's going to go to Kalispell. Well, they kind of go to Kalispell for a lot of stuff anyway. Right. So that's not something new. And then we exempted a lot of the things, obviously, that people would buy, you know, locally more. So yeah, it was not an easy sell, but it was kind of fun.
Yeah, I think the transparency of the tax is really important. The fact that we collect the money, identify the project, and pay cash for it instead of bonding out and having it be financed and that kind of thing. That's people understand that, and it's refreshing to them. Also, we concentrate on making sure we go to different quadrants of the town, so not one area is getting all the attention all the time. Safe routes to school have been a big push lately. And one of my favorite things is when we do a project, we have this sign that says your resort tax dollars at work. So it's not confused with something else going on. People can identify where the money's being spent.
Shane, you just went through this. How'd you get it sold? You know, yeah, it wasn't I don't think it was a tough sell. Because we really have such a limited scope of voters that are in the district. And because so much of what's in the rural part of the district is businesses that they're not voters. And that kind of created a little bit of a problem because they're like, well, we don't even get to vote on this. Well, no, you don't live here. And so that we had a few local residents that were that had business owners that weren't voters. But for the most part, it was a pretty easy sell. And we didn't have much of an issue with that. We did have an issue. We had the petition, and then we had the ballot language, and didn't catch it. And then we started talking about this at the last year's Resort Tax Association meeting about how everything got matched. And so as soon as I came back from there, because I mean, we were voted in last May. We had our first Resort Tax Association meeting last spring in Red Lodge. And then I came back from that meeting and immediately started down the road of fixing our ballot language, match the petition language. And so we went back to the voters this May to add education and community impact. Because what was on last year's ballot was fire, EMS, and medical, but education and community impacts wasn't in the ballot language. So we immediately went back and fixed that, and so that passed. And I was kind of surprised, you know, when we got the first polling or the first reports coming back. It didn't look like it might not pass. Education and community impact might not pass, but by the end it did. And so that's now in place. So now we go back and fix and do the appropriations part of, all right, how are we gonna divvy up this money?
I have a question that everybody in here is gonna do with. So if they had done that and that had failed, does that you mean we revert to the other one versus resort tax dead?
So the way we did it is this is already passed, you know, fire, EMS, and medical has already passed. This is where the mistake was made. So do we want education and community impacts as permissive use? And so then it passed.
But can you change it? And if it fails, your old one's still in effect then? I don't know what the legal ask on that is, because that's one of those fears is if you change it and try to do something, whoops, you just killed it.
Yeah.
So we have felt, because we've gone through a couple reallocations of how it would work, because our attorney and I had talked about that. I think because we're talking just about the allocation, not the approval of the tax itself, like tax rate. It's just a reallocation of, hey, we're gonna take this and spend it here instead. If they said no, then it would revert back to the original vote, was our interpretation. So we didn't put our full resort tax at risk just because we're saying, hey, we wanna spend it this way instead of how we've been spending.
So then I think it's probably build your ballot language to reallocate the already approved. Did that extend your time frame when you did that, or did it not?
No, and we did do one where we did reallocate with an extension. We didn't include housing in there on purpose because I think we really wanted to make sure that passed. Then we came forward with a reallocation to include housing because we weren't certain how the community would feel about affordable housing, resort taxes don't get affordable housing, but it passed. So we didn't have any issues, but yeah, that there were some thoughts of like, we want this extension to pass. We still had another opportunity. If they hadn't approved that extension that year, we still had another election cycle to go through without having to pay for a special election. So
I think what I'm hearing you ask is what is the rally cry in your own community so that you can then take that to Helena. So maybe just a quick call out to the communities west. What's kind of the rally cry around resort tax in your community? If there is one.
I don't think there's a rally cry.
It was originally roads though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Back in the day. Mayor Westwood?
Our rate, we just actually got done doing our survey that we do every 5 years in streets. Climbed right back up to the top again.
Oh.
And it's interesting how much it, there's two reasons for that. One of them is, I mean, that's the nature of street. And interestingly enough, we have tons of new streets going in this year from other, and we're using resort tax for leveraging funds to do that. But the other thing is it tends to be whatever hot buttons you have going on in your community right now. So I think one of the reasons we saw streets was there's a whole community saying, no, we don't want you making modifications to the park next to our house. We think we should be spending it on streets instead. And so that came through and it exaggerated. So when we mean we want to use resort tax for parks, we mean next to other people's house, not ours. Going back to your comment earlier about their legislature is goofy. The NIMBY factor plays into resort tax usage as much as it does anything else.
Amy, what about Columbia Falls? Do you happen to know what the rally cry was? I know I'm putting
it was fire.
It was fire.
Yeah, it was staffing there because they only had one chief, and now I think we were able to hire 2 firefighters. So it was firefighters was their original reason.
Big Mountain's fire. Big Sky, I think, was water and sewer and fire-ish.
Initially, yeah, water and sewer and fire, yeah.
Richard, are you online?
I did not see a Richard on. Oh, yeah, I do see Richard online and he's raising a hand. Go ahead, Richard. I'm trying to.
Okay, I think we got it. Right? You hear me?
Yes.
Am I getting through? Doesn't sound like it.
I can hear you,
Oh, okay.
but I don't know if the room can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, sounds like they can. Go ahead, Richard.
Okay. In Gardner, it was really pretty simple. We're not incorporated, so we didn't have a local government. Anything we get done in Gardner, either A, doesn't get done, or B, the county's responsible, or the state's responsible, or the feds are responsible. And we actually had more luck with getting the feds to be responsible than either the state or the county. And it was very clear in Gardner that we had things coming up that were going to have to be done. We had 2 old fire trucks, totally decrepit. We had a water system that had been 75% paid for by the feds 30 years ago, but needed a major overhaul. And in any case, the infrastructure in the ground was starting to age out. The school district could use a little help. All of those things were going to require, and we also had a need for a public restroom somewhere in this town, the north entrance to Yellowstone Park. And we didn't have a single public restroom. So it was a relatively easy sell in terms of either we do it this way or it ain't going to happen because the other folks are not bailing us out. And in the case of the local government, which was the most directly responsible, they didn't have the resources either for a lot of the reasons that people have already discussed in this meeting.
Thanks, Richard. So just a real quick recap on this discussion and what I think will help you in your communities as you arm your legislator. Part of what I heard here, making sure that your story is responsive to the identified need and that the tools you put into place are responsive. They're actually addressing the need that you identified is first and foremost. You talked a lot about transparency and accountability and equity, which is oddly in an inappropriate term today, but the fact that that money is not isolated in the community, it's not going to like a specific area, but if it's the revenues are spread across the community so that everybody sees a benefit, maybe not in their backyard, in their community or in their neighborhood park, but they can look around and say, everybody's getting a piece of this pie. So transparency, accountability, equity, and overall responsiveness to the need that you sold, right? I think those are a critical part of your story as you talk about not just why you need it, but how effective you've been. Talk about the success stories that you've had, right? And why it needs to be maintained. I want to spend a few minutes just going through your legislative races. Very, very important that you stay engaged with these folks. And then we'll talk just for a couple minutes about when and how to do that. This outline that you have is a great framework for how to talk to your legislators. As I'm sitting here thinking about this, I would love to come back and do kind of a workshop on how to effectively put together your message for your legislator, if that makes sense. And we can do that later, talk about it later. There's a lot of great stuff here that we're not going to get to this morning. But let's go through this list. Dave Fern is in the middle of his cycle, so he's not up for re-election for Big Mountain and Whitefish and Columbia Falls. But Dave is probably one of the most effective, soft-spoken legislators up there. He's well respected on both sides of the aisle. Hugely beneficial to you guys. House District 3 for Big Mountain and Whitefish. Debo Powers is the incumbent.
has two Republican challengers, Kathy Mitchell and Derek Peachy. I don't know enough about either one of those. Any insight on where that's going? Debo tends to be a little further left. So, but I think she's representative of the district and probably in pretty safe condition there. Any other perspective on? I think she's probably safe. Columbia Falls Whitefish, talking about Lynn Bennett probably not being real popular amongst the party. She does have two challengers, Sean Pandina and Nathan Purdy. I think Pandina is a pretty far right candidate.
He's getting pushed pretty hard.
Yeah. So I don't know where that one's gonna land.
Okay.
And then Paul Hapko is the Democratic challenger there.
That's my daughter's, I just learned this, that is my daughter's Spanish teacher. Yeah, in Columbia Falls Junior High. Yeah,
Okay.
she said vote for her, so she doesn't have to have her good teacher anymore, though. And I was like, wow.
Maybe the wrong one.
I'll have her vote in each case.
So you've got some races. So I want to go through this just so you know, talking to your sitting legislator right now may not be real effective because things may shift, right? So let's wait at least through the primary before you really start engaging, and then we can talk about like how to move on. Cook City Gardner, John S. Has turned out. You got two folks running for that Senate seat, Jason Gunderson, who I think just based on his resume might be related to Steve Gunderson, who was a complete right-wing nut job. Was also running for re-election up in the Libby area. And then Scott Rosenzweig is moving from the House to the Senate. He's running for that Senate seat. Pretty effective legislator in the House. John Est was a very pragmatic legislator. So I don't think that's a heavily right-leaning district. But we'll see what Rosenzweig can do there. Richard had a
Yeah. I could probably add a little to that. Rosenzweig won the House seat by like 13 votes, but the other House seat has an incumbent Democrat, the city of Livingston, who is largely going to be amenable to our kinds of arguments. And so Scott's probably got a better chance of replacing Esp than he might have had actually retaining his House seat. There is a Democratic candidate and a Republican candidate that's not a contested primary, as far as I can tell, for the House District 57. But there are clear reasons why we need to talk, particularly to I can't pronounce the guy's name particularly, but the Democratic candidate, this first time out for a legislative run, but he's a firefighter EMT, and again is a lot more likely to understand our issues than the Republican candidate.
And two newcomers there in House District 57, Jordan, it's either Vigant or Vigant, and then Bob Frank on the Republican
side.
Right,
Vigant is the Democratic candidate. They're both going to go through the primary because neither one of them has a contested race.
All right, let's go to Red Lodge. Forrest Mandeville is the incumbent there. Kelly Hale, a Democrat challenger. I'm assuming that that's a pretty solid.
I don't see that one changing.
Yeah. And then on the House side, more concerning race in my view. Brad Barker has been a great representative.
Yeah,
Mary Carmen challenging from the right.
Yeah, and I'm afraid, and it's going to prove whether elections can just be flat out bought, because I have no idea where I just like the money they were spending on the election and into the budget. We could do wonders. We could do wonders with that. But it's one of those. He's in the House, so he's not considered one of the nasty nine. But they're approaching with that same level, and it's it's been really, like you said earlier, it's interesting to watch that fringe come in and just with everybody I know who's gone out and actually taken them up on going out and researching it comes back and says, I researched it. You're goofy, but yeah, I wish I could tell you how that we'll know. But you can't drive from Laurel to Red Lodge without seeing the counter sign every 10 feet, the entire road, 50-mile drive.
Ugh, rough. And then there's a Democrat challenge for Richard Guest. I'm guessing that's not even a.
Whoever wins the primary will be who wins the seat.
St. Regis not here. Virginia City or West. Just go West. West Yellowstone, Hebgen, Big Sky. Cora Newman is in the middle of her term. Again, very sound legislator. House district, you've just got an incumbent with Elaine Griffith and a challenger, Greg Lemon, who I'm not familiar with unless that's the former Fishway from Parks today.
So the Fish Wildlife Park guy is help me out, Dan. Oh, heck, I'm afraid I just have it.
That's right.
Yes.
So again, some critical primary races. But I think, is that list part of the?
Yeah, we'll make sure the list is out.
And I can even forward this, you can have.
What I'm hearing is it would be helpful to schedule maybe a work session as people are interested and able to attend after the primary.
After the primary.
And then, I guess, for those who aren't able to join, maybe you could just offer yourself up as a resource. To
Absolutely. This is a great.
I remember the guy's name.
I think like here, I still.
Oh, well. That's not decided. I think that's just for, that's probably somebody else here. Yeah.